Welcome back to Peace Through Strength podcast, brought to you by the American Security Council Foundation. I'm your host, Joy Vacherbeck, and back with me is our senior analyst, Lawrence Sanford. Welcome back, Larry.
Joy, pleasant to be with you again.
You too. And we are going to talk about Larry's article on China conundrum. And we talk a lot, Larry, about China and all the inroads they're making around the world, including our own backyard in Mexico and Latin America. And we talk a lot about the spy balloons and their land grabs, and a lot of it makes China seem, as you say, wanting to take over the world and dominate. And it looks like they're a pretty big economic powerhouse as well as military. But yes, in your paper on China's conundrum, if you would share with our listeners and just brief us on what's going on inside China that people maybe are not aware of.
Well, a conundrum is a puzzle. And China is a big puzzle as to what does the United States do to the second largest economy in the world and soon to be the largest, most effective military in the world. So what do we as Americans do about it? Well, first of all, we have to take care of ourselves. But from a perspective of handling China, they have some internal issues that we should exploit. And the first major issue is demographics. China has a population of approximately 1.4 billion. It is slowly decreasing, but they face a mathematical demographic that will be very difficult to overcome. Namely, the numbers are 4, 2, 1. Two grandparents on the wife's side and on the husband's side. There's a total of 4 people. When the grandparents reach retirement age of 60, or in the female's case, I think it's 55, they now can go on to the social system. Their 2 children, they have a one-child policy. So the 4 grandparents produced 2 children. Each couple produced 1. So now that couple produces 1. So you have a ratio of 4 to 1. And so the 4 grandparents are on Social Security. When their 2 children reach Social Security age, then now we have 6 people on Social Security being supported by 1 child. This is not going to work in a society. China does not have immigration the way U.S. does. The Chinese are very chauvinistic and probably the most racist bunch of people in the entire world. And so their disastrous one-child policy back in the 79s through approximately 2000, where the Chinese government forced abortion sterilization programs on any couple that had more than 1 child. So if you had 1 child and the woman was pregnant, they would literally grab that woman and force an abortion or sterilization on that woman. And so it was a terrible policy. And so what the couples did in China, the male child is favored over the female child. And so if a couple was facing the future of only 1 child, and they found out that the child in the womb was a female, they would abort it, hoping that the next time the woman became pregnant, it would be a male. And as a result, over the years, the demographics again, there are now 20 to 30 million unmarried single men that outnumber women. And single men roaming around the countryside, roaming around the cities without the possibility of having a woman for a spouse, a companion, a partner, is not good socially or economically. So China's facing the 4-2-1 and just the cultural aspect of not having enough women for the men. It's not good for society, and it's not good for the individuals.
No, and at first that's very sad, the policy that they did have, and the fact that they had to choose a girl over a boy. But in many societies, that is the way it goes. However, so I have a question for you. How long do you think, in your opinion, that China can sustain its elderly population and still have all the economic loans going out to all these nations around the world with their Belt and Road Initiative. Bloomberg, I believe, says there are trillions of dollars in debt.
China's debt ratio is even worse than the United States, which is pretty bad. But one of the differences is that almost all the Chinese debt is internal debt. In other words, it's within China, whereas the United States debt is throughout the capitalistic world. So the U.S. is subject a little more to international pressures when it comes to debt financing, debt obligations. And now the Belt and Road, there was just an article recently where China is holding these Belt and Road Initiative countries like Sri Lanka, Pakistan. They're holding their feet to the fire to pay back their loans. And I think we in the West, as soon as a country signs a BRI deal, if they don't open up the books as to what the loan is, then I say we stop financing these countries, because what they do is the Chinese come in and they say, we're going to build you this stadium, we're going to build you this highway, we're going to build you this railroad. But no one knows what the deal is. The loans are opaque, they're buried. And within the loan agreements, there are all sorts of payback caveats. And Sri Lanka, again, formerly known as Ceylon, is a classic where they couldn't pay back the debts to build this port in the south part of the island. And so the Chinese have taken it over. And now, since Sri Lanka, in its infinite wisdom of green energy, banned fertilizers, the country is starving. The balance of payments is down the chute. The country is in serious turmoil. It's a socialist country where the government runs everything, so they don't have any fuel, they don't have any money. So now the Chinese oil company has just made a deal to come in and start providing some oil. So
you're leading right into my next question. You're actually on this BRI. Brings into the demographic situation as well, and the elderly, and from what I understand, not being able to probably have enough crops to feed all their people. So they're going and buying land, as we know, elsewhere in different countries, shipping the crops back to theirs, farming, fishing, which is often accompanied by military boats. And and then also, you just mentioned the electricity problem in Sri Lanka, because they're going green, which a lot of the world is on this environmental kick of going green, but it seems as if China's benefiting off of the rest of the world going green, while they're still remaining on coal power, as you mentioned in your paper here.
Yes, the Chinese are all in favor of green energy everywhere. They're building a lot of solar panels and a lot of windmills, but at the same time, they're building 2 coal plants a week. So for all the reductions the Americans have done, it's just completely overwhelmed by the Chinese and to some extent by India, building coal plants, polluting the atmosphere. So this whole green energy push in the United States is we're dismantling one of the pillars of the American society and economy, namely the energy sector and the transportation sector, to go to green energy cars, electric vehicles, windmills, which kill thousands of birds and just a total disaster. How we expect to provide energy through windmills, which is intermittent, through solar panels when the sun goes down. So when the sun goes down and there's no wind, where are we going to get our power? And please don't tell me you're going to do it with battery backups. There's no battery backups available.
Well, and I'm pretty sure that China knows this, because I was reading that their electricity grid is already over demand, so they're having to shut off certain hours of work, maybe even close at some of these facilities, and it's going to affect some of the American companies that are there as well. So do you think that they'll ever get away from the coal?
Not in my lifetime, and I'm not sure your lifetime either. So they will have coal, and they don't have too much natural gas. And one of the problems is with the climate change. I don't think anybody's denying climate change. The big argument is, what do you do about it? Is it necessarily bad? But one of the aspects is a lot of the rivers in China are drying up, and they depend not to a great extent, but greater than the United States, on electricity generated by dams. And so with not enough water in the rivers, the dam situation is not generating enough power through the dams. speaking of dams, one of the things the Chinese is doing is affecting their southeastern neighbors, namely the Mekong River and some of the other rivers that start out at the Tibetan Plateau, which China conquered in its imperial quest. A lot of the rivers that go through India, Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, all originate in the Tibetan Plateau and come on down towards the south. And the Chinese are damming these rivers, so it's affecting the Mekong and a bunch of the other major rivers in the area, which is having a huge impact on the local population, fishing and farming industry. So the Chinese don't care. It's all about them.
And that's part of the problem. And like you said, we're not denying the climate change, nor did I mean anything by the going green, but they're benefiting off of this to the detriment of a lot of other nations. Yeah. And certainly we can go solar and wind, as we mentioned in a previous podcast, as a supplemental.
Yes.
But they know full well that if you overload the electricity grid, you're going to have problems. We need a backup to that.
Yeah. And nuclear, anybody with an IQ above 100 who's not politically correct and who's not religiously opposed to energy knows that the way to go for the future, if you want a clean atmosphere, is nuclear. There's no carbon dioxide emissions. It's reliable 24/7. There has been no one killed in America by nuclear energy in the last 60 years. So it's relatively safe. There's always the radiation and the China syndrome, blah, blah, that movie. But in fact, there has been no major catastrophe in the U.S. And the biggest catastrophe ever on a nuclear plant was in the Soviet Union days, back in the Chernobyl.
Yeah.
And that particular nuclear power plant was an old design, and that particular nuclear power plant was also a defense industry plant where they were producing uranium for military purposes, whereas all the power plants in the U.S. are strictly for energy production, and so it's a total different ballgame altogether, and the technologies have changed remarkably. So, nuclear energy is the way to go.
That makes sense, and thank you for sharing that as well. But now I also want to get back to China, and when we say China, we're talking about the CCP party, the Communist Party, not the people per se, because they're usually the ones that are getting probably the wrong end of this deal. But
yes.
Can you talk a little, in your paper, you talked about all the atrocities that the CCP has done to minorities and religious groups, including their own Falun Gong.
Well, yes, to be a communist is to be anti-religion, and in particular, the Christian religion. And so they go after the Christians, and they also go after Falun Gong, which is a Chinese Buddhist meditation, exercise, social kind of organization that was started. And at one time, the government thought it was good for the people until it got up to about 100 million of the Chinese were involved in Falun Gong, and they started to protest some of the CCP actions. And right away, the CCP turned on a dime, called them a heretic, fringe, wacko organization, and started arresting them, subduing them, and everything else. And one of the other atrocities that the Chinese Communist Party does is organ harvesting. That they take prisoners, they take people, they slam them in jail, and then they have a thriving organ transplant business where Americans go and many others go to get organ transplants. And amazingly so, there's no wait list because they just go to the nearest prison and grab somebody and transplant that particular prisoner's heart or liver or kidney, whatever's needed. And lo and behold, will they have a happy, satisfied, paying customer that's got a new organ. So it is a brutal, inhumane organization that doesn't hesitate to kill people. And during the Tiananmen Square uprising, leaders in the Chinese party were willing to kill hundreds of thousands of people to subdue that uprising because they did not want to follow in the steps of the Soviet Union. Just went away because the people rose up. China's not going to allow that. They're going to suppress them. And
so what I'm hearing you say is that any organization, be it religious or their own Falun Gong, anybody that's getting too powerful, too much of a group there that could be a problem to the CCP, they're going to quell.
Yeah, and plus they have the surveillance state now with all the modern technologies. They have cameras everywhere. They have computers. it will be very difficult to be a popular uprising. It's going to have to be corruption within the CCP that finally says enough is enough. We don't want to be in this track anymore. We want to take care of the people. But I certainly don't see that happening right away. And the Chinese people, until 1949, had been fighting for over 100 years, various factions and sects, and the Chinese Communist Party versus the Kuomintang, the KMT. So when the communists finally took over, there was relative peace. And since Deng Xiaoping, the Chinese have really prospered because the Chinese are a very industrial, intelligent, hardworking population. And it's a remarkable achievement that they've made in raising up the population to the prosperity that it has. Now, mind you, they've been greatly assisted by Wall Street selling them the rope that's going to hang the capitalists by sending in trillions of dollars to help finance their industries. And they've captured our political elite so that we end up with $300 billion a year in trade deficits to finance the Chinese. They certainly have outsmarted us from my perspective.
We've helped them get to this point, and they're still considered a developing country under the WTO's special program.
And they've taken over the United Nations, so the head of the WHO, the World Health Organization, is nothing but a stooge or a puppet for the Chinese. And they've done a great job.
Well, we're certainly happy that the Chinese people are prospering, but at the same time, President Xi has turned us into a, as we call it, fascist kind of surveillance police state, I guess you could say.
Yes.
So
yes.
From a peace through strength solution.
When I hear TikTok is freedom of speech and the government of the United States should not interfere with freedom of speech, I say that's an issue. I don't have an argument with that, but I'd say the greater issue is our national security and corruption of our culture. And TikTok is a CCP organ whose purpose is to make China look good and the United States look bad. It drives logarithms so that our youth in particular go down rabbit holes of anti-Americanism, suicides, overeating, and all sorts of other bad cultural habits. And it would be of note that the twin sister of TikTok in China, they only allow the children of China to watch it for a very limited period of time, whereas in America, you read stories where kids spend hours upon hours a day on TikTok. It's not socially good for us to allow it. So I hear this freedom of speech argument, but to me, the national security argument is a lot stronger. And I think the logical argument of reciprocity, if the Chinese won't allow Google and Facebook in China, why should we allow TikTok and WeChat in America?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Larry. I appreciate you coming on and briefing us on the China conundrum.
Okay, thanks, Joy. Take care.
And to our listeners, you can read Larry's article on www.ascf.us. You can subscribe to our newsletter to stay current with all of his articles, Alan Dowd's articles, and our podcasts. He's also on Substack, so please check that out, as well as follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And subscribe to our YouTube and Rumble channels at American Security Council Foundation, and please comment. Thank you very much, and join us next time as we talk about Larry's article on the poisoning of America on our Peace Through Strength podcast. Thank you.
Take care.
Take care.